Every Yes, so my name is Crystal Dudera, and I am a relationship rehab coach specializing in marriage healing, an associate coach for the Millionaire Marriage Program. And today I have the privilege and honor of introducing the creator, the founder of the Millionaire Marriage Club, Nancy Landrum. Now, Nancy Landrum, on top of creating the Millionaire Marriage Program, the best comprehensive, concise, step-by-step course on how to create a happy marriage. She is an author of 8 books and counting, I believe, including How to Stay Married and Love It and the Inner Child Path to Healing books. She is the host of a TV show, Relationship Rehab Coach, and has taught couples across the nation. But what I love about Nancy is something that can't be read from somewhere online, but from personal experience and spending time with her. My husband and I started as clients of hers, and within a few months of working with her, she helped us completely change the trajectory of our marriage for the better. And I think what makes Nancy so effective is she did not let either my husband or myself off the hook. Yeah, she's compassionate, she's kind, she's loving and understanding, and she kept both of us firmly accountable. Plus, she modeled for us everything that she taught us, including setting and enforcing boundaries, which you'll be learning today. And what better person to learn from than someone who lives out what they teach, someone who can model for us whatever principles and skills that she teaches us, from someone who practices what they preach. So Nancy is full of wisdom. And I hope that you have your pen and paper ready to take notes from her. It's going to be a great class. So help me welcome Nancy Landrum.
Thank you, Crystal, for that lovely, generous introduction. And why don't all of you give yourselves a hand for being here this morning? And thank you, Crystal. We have a wonderful guest behind the scenes, Lindsley Boucher, that is, there she waved at us, who's handling Zoom behind the scenes and teaching my staff how to do that in the future. I am very grateful for all that I've learned about inner child work. It was not much fun in the beginning. I learned about inner child work during a very dark time in my life. I was extremely depressed. My marriage was in trouble. My older son was in the process of becoming a drug addict and in lots of trouble with school and the law. And I was burdened by a lot of self-judgment. It's my fault, I'm failing. Everything I thought was a symbol of me good, being a good woman was disappearing. I became so depressed, and the only comfort I found at the time was food. So I began binge eating, and over a period of 9 months gained 100 pounds. I began looking for some help at about the 20-pound mark because I was smart enough to know this wasn't a matter of diet. There was no possibility that I'd have the self-control to stick to a diet. I found a coach named Jackie that began to work with me about encouraging me to journal what was going on, to journal my feelings. And honestly, there wasn't anyone in my life up to that time that had encouraged me to feel my feelings. The whole purpose of addiction, food addiction or any other addiction, is to mask the feelings because the feelings were so painful, I didn't want to feel them. She encouraged me to feel the feelings and then modeled for me what to do. It pulled me out of a depression that was so bad that Jackie told me later, the first 4 or 5 times I saw her, she thought I might have to be hospitalized because the depression was that bad. But inner child work is what was the path that led me out of that depression. And it's a model that I continue to use for myself today. You'll be hearing more about that in a few minutes. I'm going to share my screen to show you a PowerPoint that helps me deliver a message that I believe is life-changing for any of you who choose to use it. I called it How to Say Yes to Yourself, because you know how people say, take care of yourself or be good to yourself. Well, in those days, I didn't know how to do that. All I knew how to do was to show up and look the best I could and put on this facade of the happy face, and try to convince other people that I had a good life, I was a good person. But it didn't, I had no idea how to take care of my feelings or what was going on at the time. Let's see why. Oh, here we are. I also, as well as thanking Crystal and Lindsay, I want to thank Terry, my publicity genius. She's not able to be with us today. She's taking care of grandchildren. And Karen is my technology genius. She's a lifesaver for me. And Jason is my website genius, and Crystal is my social media genius. I really appreciate every one of them, and I wanted to say that right up front. Okay, here we go. We're going to talk about inner child work. It isn't new. It isn't crazy. It's not schizophrenic. Even though you're talking about different parts that live inside of you, it's a way of, well, first of all, let's talk about Carl Jung. He probably was the first person to talk about the inner child and the need to heal the inner child. And then in the, believe it was the 60s, transactional analysis was very popular. And it also broke us, our awareness, our consciousness down into various parts that are sometimes working against each other. And then in the 80s, John Bradshaw wrote a book about inner child healing that became a bestseller. The inner child, okay, who is the inner child? It's the part of you that holds your memories. It's the part of you that feels your feelings. The inner child without conscious awareness may be calling the shots in your decision-making for good or for ill. The inner child work is learning how to manage your feelings and choices from a place of appropriate self-love and balance. The model that Jackie taught me has two aspects of the inner child. The first aspect is the perfectionist child. And I'm going to speak in the female gender, but I've had male clients who have also learn to do inner child work for themselves. Everyone has an inner child. The inner perfectionist child longs to be loved and secure, is very rule oriented. If I follow the rules, I'll be loved and safe. The problem is the rules change from person to person, relationship to relationship, from day to day. The rules tend to change, which is very frustrating for the perfectionist child. Tries to force decisions from a place of fear. If I don't do this, I'll be rejected. Or if I do this, no one will love me. Therefore, a people pleaser and tends to be very codependent. Controls by manipulation and judgment, known as negative self-talk. But she also serves a very useful purpose by maintaining routine habits, being responsible, reminding you to brush your teeth, to pay the mortgage, to put gas in the car. When PC is in control, I tend to feel anxious. I feel afraid of disappointing someone. I wonder if all of you would mute yourselves so I don't we're not hearing background noise. Thank you so much. I'm unable to make clear decisions or set loving boundaries for others. I make decisions based on what will please others or create the least upset. I feel very self-righteous because I am working so hard to be good. I sometimes feel exhausted, depleted, guilty, inadequate, and trapped. I blame myself for my unhappiness. I'm not good enough, or I'm not spiritual enough. That must be why my life isn't working the way I want it to. And then the rebellious child, another aspect, takes over to get some relief from all the pressure, the judgment. The characteristics of the rebellious child are she longs to be loved and secure, exactly like the perfectionist child. She also believes if I follow the rules, I'll be loved and safe. But here's the glitch. The rebellious child hates the rules and rebels against the pressure of trying to be perfect. She expresses rebellion in a variety of ways. Addictions, my personal belief is this is where all addictions are birthed. Manipulation, temper tantrums, self-destructive behaviors. Controls the self by manipulation and temptation. For instance, I deserve this $500 buying binge at Nordstrom, or I lost my temper, I blew up, I was really mean to my husband, and I'll use him as an example, but he deserved it. So it's okay that I was disrespectful. The rebellious child also serves a very useful purpose by insisting that I get enough rest and fun. When RC is in control, however, I feel justified in blaming others for my behavior or attacking others. I'm out of control with anger, resentment, or blame because those emotions feel powerful instead of feeling like a victim. I feel stubborn and determined to have my own way because, of course, my way is best. I'm out of control with spending food, alcohol, sleep, work, drugs, or sex because they give me temporary relief from the pressure of trying to obey all the rules and be perfect. Ultimately, I feel dissatisfied, disappointed, ashamed, powerless, and unloved because PC then takes over and the cycle of self-judgment and shame begins in reaction to being quote unquote bad. It's a hamster wheel cycle that just seems to have no end. PC and RC are often fighting for control. This is the state I was in when I was so depressed and binge eating. It felt like I was at the mercy of these two crazy forces in my head. And I did not know how to, I didn't know how to get through. So what is the solution? And is it possible to bring peace between PC and RC? That was the question that Jackie began to answer for me. The answer is to develop a loving parent part that brings the perfectionist child and the rebellious child under her wings of unconditional love. I did not know how to be a loving parent to myself. My parents were wonderful, responsible people. They fed their children, we were housed, we had clothing, we were taught right from wrong, but they weren't very good at nurturing. I didn't feel nurtured, I didn't feel loved particularly. I don't remember ever, I rarely heard the words, I love you. And I don't ever remember hearing anything like, no matter what you do, we'll love you. You know, that was that unconditional love in my experience seemed to be missing. So when Jackie was describing the loving parent to me, I thought, I don't know how to do that. she had to model it for me to teach me how to be a loving parent to myself. Now, I had two boys that, as they were growing up, I loved them very much. They heard I love you a lot. As adults, I asked them both, did you ever question whether I loved you or not? And they both said no, they never did. There were a lot of other things I did as a parent that I could have done better, but they absolutely knew they were loved. I didn't know how to deliver that love to myself, however. The loving parent moderates between the perfectionist child and the rebellious child with unconditional love and boundaries for their behavior. So the boundary for the perfectionist child is to stop the self-judgment, stop the negative self-talk. And the boundary for the rebellious child is to stop actions such as out of control eating or out of control spending or drug use or alcoholism in order to bring peace between these two. They're no longer in a war with each other. So here's some example of loving boundaries. The loving parent stops PC's negative judgmental self-talk, evaluates her constant attempts to be loved by pleasing others. Pleasing others isn't a bad thing, but when you can please someone in a way that is beneficial to them and nurturing to you, that's a great thing. That when you please someone in such a way that it is detrimental or enabling poor behavior or depleting to myself, that the loving parent would put a stop to. Refuses to allow overwork. This was a big one for me. I thought if I started a job, I had to finish it. And sometimes it was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning before it was finished. I remember I wanted to wallpaper a bathroom. And after learning about how to be a loving parent, I told PC ahead of time, I'm going to only work on the bathroom until I'm tired, until my legs are tired and I'm tired of doing work. And then I'm going to stop for the day and I'll come back the next day when I'm ready. This was a totally new way of doing things for PC. But it took me 3 days to finish wallpapering the bathroom. But when I finished, I felt good. My body felt good. I wasn't achy. Emotionally, I loved the job I did. And emotionally, I was really proud of myself for not overdoing it to the point where I was in pain. The loving parent listens to PC's anxieties. And in my case, PC has hundreds of anxieties. There's always something to feel anxious about. But the loving parent listens to the anxieties and then comforts and forgives the anxieties to calm PC down. And part of that I'll talk about in a minute is helping to change beliefs that are driving behaviors that are out of control. Stops RC's out of control anger and addictions. I think I've pretty much mastered. It's been a long time since I've blown my stack at someone, attacking them in anger. I think it's kind of dangerous to say this because who knows what will happen. But I think I've mastered my tendency to blow up at someone when they trigger my anger. I have not yet mastered the food deal. I don't very rarely binge anymore, but I find myself eating for emotional reasons to calm or comfort my emotions. So that's an area that I'm still working on. I'm not perfect at any of this. In other words, it just has given me tools that has brought me a long, long ways from where I started. The loving parent stops the blaming and self-justification that RC loves to do. supports healthy rest and recreational times. Not too long ago, I realized I didn't have enough social interaction. Mostly the adults I saw were my clients, and they're my clients. They're not meant to be my friends. And so I decided to invite some friends over on Sunday I call it table games at 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. Anyone who wants to come and play table games is welcome. Now, that really scared PC. What if they don't like me? What if they don't want to come? What if they only come because they're trying to please me? Well, the loving parent in me listened to PC's anxieties and calmed them down. And I said, I expect them to take care of themselves. I expect them to come if they want to. If they're coming only to please me, that's on them. It's not on me. So I've enjoyed several months now of having friends come over on Sunday afternoon. Listens and validates the feelings of RC. And for me, there were a lot of painful memories from my childhood and my young adulthood that needed to be aired, needed to be heard and validated. The loving parent did that for me. Comforts and forgives. So when RC blows it and eats too much to comfort herself, the loving parent steps in and comforts and forgives her for blowing it. There are other ways that RC or PC can step outside the loving arms of the loving parent. But when that happens, there's always forgiveness and comfort. How does a loving parent do all this? By listening with loving attention to both PC and RC. I think it was Carl Jung. I know it was, in fact, and I should have looked up the quote, but he says something about whatever stays in the unconscious controls your life. It's necessary to pull things out of the unconscious into the conscious where you can see them in front of you and deal with them. That gives you freedom. And that's so often, I think I read a statistic that we human beings have roughly 60,000 thoughts a day. And for many of us, most of those thoughts might be negative. The higher the percentage of negative thoughts, the unhappier we are. So the loving parent helps the inner child to bring those thoughts forward so that we can hear exactly what's being said in our head and to listen with loving attention. The loving parent then comforts the pain and validates the hurt and forgives and gives lavish, unconditional love. Like to say, I say to my inner child, there's nothing that you can do that will make me stop loving you. I will set healthy boundaries, however, out of love for you, not out of punishment, ever. Set appropriate boundaries for myself and others. Reframes negative beliefs into self-honoring beliefs. Beliefs are what drive the engine of our lives and create the results that we experience. So here's the belief train. How do you change a negative belief for a more positive, self-honoring belief? You start by looking at the quality of your relationship or life that you're unhappy with. That's the caboose, that's the end result. And then you look at your own behavior. What behaviors are you choosing or allowing to happen that contribute to that quality of life that you don't like? And then what feelings are triggering the behaviors that create that quality of life? Notice there's an engineer in this train. When the inner child is in charge of the train, she might choose belief that lead to a quality of life that then she's very unhappy about. And I'll give you an example here in a minute, but whatever belief you are running your train on, that determines the ultimate outcome in your life. Here's an example. A few years ago, I was unhappy with the number of clients I had. I wanted more clients. The behavior, my behavior that was contributing to that result was lack of effective marketing and resistance to marketing myself. The feelings were insecurity about my value and embarrassment about self-promotion. Self-promotion in the family culture that I grew up in, self-promotion was bad. It was like thinking more highly of yourself than you ought to think, or getting too big for your britches. I remember that being said frequently. So the belief I was running on is that I am not good enough. My perfectionist child was saying that belief. I am unworthy of a full client load. It is being stuck up to self-promote. All of those beliefs were the track that the perfectionist child was running. And notice that she puts it in the I language. I am not good enough. It's very personal judgment. I am unworthy. So the choice of the perfectionist child was to run her life on the train tracks of limited childhood beliefs and adopting the insecurities and beliefs of my father. So the belief track that I was running on was the end result was I didn't have enough clients and I was unhappy about that. So I needed to make a belief change, which is hard for the inner child to do, but the loving parent does it on behalf of the inner child. The loving parent, in this case, the loving parent, chose to believe the overwhelmingly positive feedback I get from my clients. My perfectionist child was resistant to believing that the feedback that I was being given. Excuse me, I'm neat there, okay. And then the feelings that came from that new belief were greater confidence. I began to feel better about what I did. The result of those better feelings is the loving parent placed ads in Yelp and a local magazine with testimonials from happy clients. And my loving parent reassured perfectionist child that this is not being stuck up. This is not being bad. And the end result was the positive energy attracted new clients to my coaching business. That's just one example. I'm wondering if there are any questions. Would you write them in the chat box? And I'm going to stop screen sharing here for a minute to answer any questions or comments that you have about what you've seen so far. It's a lot of information, and if there's no questions or comments, I'll go back to the screen share. I'm not seeing anything, so let's go back. The result of inadequately loved inner child is inevitably codependency or excessive people pleasing. The wounded inner child and codependency go hand in hand. So far in my experience, I've never seen one without the other. I see there did something came up in the chat box. I'll address it at the end of the presentation. So sorry I missed you right now or didn't give you enough time. So the definition that I love of codependency is an imbalance of responsibility. meaning one person is extremely maybe over responsible, the other person is less responsible. They tend to get together in a relationship that doesn't serve either of them very well. So are any of these statements true for you? I try to fix another's pain even when it's the consequence of their own choice. I pay for another's consequences. That, one of the easiest ways to illustrate that is when a parent pays for a speeding ticket that their teenage kid got, rather than expecting the kid to get a job, pay for it, or do community service as a good teaching moment to avoid speeding in the future. When you pay the price that belongs to another, you're being codependent. I do for others what they are capable of doing for themselves. An extreme example, a ridiculous example would be if you were hand feeding a 7-year-old child who was perfectly healthy and capable of feeding themselves, or dressing a child when they are old enough and capable enough to dress themselves. That's pretty extreme, but that's an example of doing for someone else what they are capable of doing for themselves, and that would be valuable learning for them to do on their own. I'm frequently tired, but I can't rest because this has to happen or that has to happen, or somebody needs me. I find it hard to take time for myself. I feel guilty. That was true of me years ago. I've gotten better and better at taking care of myself, taking time for myself to recharge my batteries. But years ago, if I sat down in the middle of the day to watch a favorite program or to read a chapter of my book, I would feel guilty, like I ought to be up and doing something. I try to manage others' behavior or appearance so that I can be happy or well thought of. This was so true of me with my children. When Stephen began to misbehave, it was so public. He was kicked out of 4 high schools. He was in trouble with the law for trying to steal stolen property. His drug use made his behavior extremely erratic. And it was so embarrassing to me. I kept trying. Of course, I was concerned about his welfare. Absolutely. But some of the pain anyway was because he was blowing my cover. He was making very public the fact that I had a child who was out of control. And in my world at that time, that meant that I was being seen as a bad mother. In fact, there were a few people, friends and family members, who actually said that to me, that he was misbehaving because I had not done a good job as a mother. It was extremely, excruciatingly painful. And yet it was one of the most wonderful things that Stephen could have done for me, was to blow my cover. Codependency results in what I call Velcro relationships. One person has the hooks, the other person has the loops. And the hooks are things like, I need your help. You've got to help me or a disaster will happen. I need your love. Or you don't love me if you are unwilling to do whatever for me. I had a client whose 21-year-old daughter thought she was grown up enough to quit college and move across the country with her boyfriend. But she was furious with her dad because he wanted to take her off of their cell phone bill and their car insurance. And she was accusing him of not loving her if he didn't take care of her. And finally, he was able to recognize that she wants to be an adult, then let go, allow her to be an adult. So he gave her a 2 months notice with a lot of anxiety on his part. What if she doesn't get a job? What if she doesn't, pay her cell phone or her car insurance? And I just assured him that's part of how we learn as an adult how to be responsible. A few months later, he emailed me and said their relationship was better than ever, but he needed to let go of trying to prevent any disaster from happening to her. When you hear the hooks, I need help, you've got to help me, or a disaster would happen. This is when the perfectionist child's voice just becomes glaring. I don't know if you've had this experience of a voice in your head that shouts at you, I really should, I ought to, or I have to. This is PC's voice, and it results in the loops. I want you to like me. I need your approval. And I'm afraid if I say no, I'm a bad person. And this is also a big loop. I can't stand to see you suffer. It hurts me too badly to see you suffer. So I'm going to take your suffering away to alleviate my own pain, even when, if I allowed you to suffer a little bit, you might grow in some area that is necessary in order for you to be really a healthy human being. I realized with Stephen eventually came home as an adult to live with us because the drug use had damaged his heart so badly he could not work and wasn't expected to live very long. And yet I found myself feeling so resentful of a lot of his behavior or habits. He was not easy to live with. It was very difficult. But I had this awareness one day, the reason I resent you is because you're not going to change. That means if I want to get over my resentment, I have to make the change on my side. It was one of those light bulb days that was so profound for me, the awareness. Up until then, I'd been operating on the belief that the only way for me to stop resenting you is if you act the way I want you to, if you're a good house guest in our home. And Stephen wasn't going to change, so I had to. That meant setting some healthy boundaries for him and for myself. And in Stephen's case, when he moved in with us, he took over the garage. He had a couple of motorcycles, lots of parts, lots of tools, workbench, storage cabinets. And I just needed to be able to get to the washer and dryer and my garden tools on one wall. And the other wall, I needed to get to my workbench and my paint supplies. And his stuff kept migrating over to my side, my area, so that I'd be stepping over, tripping over, picking up his things, putting them back. I asked him politely, he agreed, but he didn't follow through. I nagged him, I yelled at him, please keep your things on your part of the garage. You have 2/3 of the garage. I just need a little bit here. And finally, with that awareness that the reason I'm nagging you and nagging wasn't working, never works, in fact. But the reason I feel resentful is because you aren't changing the way I want you to change. Therefore, I have to change. So one day I took a roll of masking tape and a yardstick and put tape down on the concrete floor, giving myself a 3-foot wide aisle to the washer and dryer and to my workbench and supplies. And I asked Stephen to come and take a look. And I said, on this side of the masking tape is my space. The other side of the masking tape, you can do anything you want. But if I come out to the garage and I find your things on my side of the masking tape, I'm not going to yell at you anymore. I'm not going to nag you. I'm just going to put your things in the trash. And I said, is that okay with you? Yes, it is. He shrugged his shoulders. That's fine. Well, the next time I went out to do laundry, there was a motorcycle engine on top of the washing machine. So when you set a boundary, expect resistance. I just shrugged my shoulders, looked at it, no drama, no more bawling Stephen out, no more being angry. I just picked up the motorcycle engine and dumped it in the trash barrel. A couple days later, he asked me if I knew where his engine was. And I said, yeah, it's in the trash. I found it on top of the washer. He never, ever left anything of his on my side of the masking tape anymore. I set boundaries. That's an example of setting a boundary for Stephen that benefited me. It also benefited him. He needed to be more aware of how to be a respectful house guest. But I also set boundaries for my own behavior that liberated me from a woman I didn't like very much. When I was angry with Jim, my husband, and would yell at him or be sarcastic with him, otherwise be very disrespectful, I didn't like the woman I was when I acted that way. I didn't know what to do instead until our coach taught us how to speak respectfully no matter what. But once we learned how to speak respectfully, what I started out doing was speaking respectfully to Jim for his sake. But after a couple of weeks, I realized I felt more self-respect when I treated him with respect. And then treating others with respect, it generalized so that it became something I did for myself, not just for Jim, not just for the marriage, but because I wanted to enjoy greater self-respect. That was a boundary that I set for myself. The other part of that was if I ever get triggered and I think I'm about to step over the line into disrespect behavior, I will call a timeout on myself and go write in my journal or go for a walk or go pull weeds until the anger calms down. Boundaries for another frees me from resentment, from being used and abused. There were several boundaries eventually that I set for Stephen that freed me from resentment and actually freed us both from the hooks and loops of a codependent relationship. However, a boundary without a consequence is worthless. I don't know if those of you who are parents, have you ever said to your child, you do that one more time and I'm going to, you won't, whatever it is, you won't be able to eat dessert. I won't give you dessert. And yet when the time comes, you feel bad and you go ahead and give them dessert. Well, you set a boundary with your threat, but the consequence eliminated the effectiveness of the boundary. A consequence without enforcing is a lie. And a reasonable, respectful boundary is automatically good for me and for the other. Now, a loving parent trains others how to treat the inner child by setting and enforcing appropriate boundaries for how they treat you. One of my clients was afraid that this was too controlling, but I'm not controlling the other's life. I'm not telling, in Steve's case, using him as an example, I'm not, telling Stephen how to live his life. I'm not telling him to keep his part of the garage clean. He made a lot of choices I wish he had made differently. But the only thing I was controlling was how he treated me. And I set the boundary and a consequence. And if he chose to violate the boundary, then he had to suffer the consequence. That was only in relationship to how he was treating me. It doesn't have anything to do with being controlling of another person's life. So a reasonable, again, this was such a mind-blowing thought to me. A reasonable and respectful boundary is healthy for me and automatically healthy for the other person, whether they happen to like it or not. There were other boundaries that I needed to set with Stephen and sometimes with other people. I remember one example when I had a carpenter doing some work for me, and he kept promising to show up, but he wouldn't show up. He started the job, but he wouldn't finish it. And I was patient and kind for 9 long months because I thought that was what being a good person was. It finally occurred to me that I was supporting his habit of being irresponsible. And then setting a boundary with a consequence became something I was able to do for my own welfare. I wanted my cabinets finished, and it also happened to be good for him, although he didn't like it. I got on the phone with him and said, "When's the soonest you can be finished with my cabinets?" And he said, "Oh, by next Wednesday." This was probably a Friday. And I said, "Okay, every day after Wednesday that they aren't finished, I'm subtracting $20 from what I owe you." He was furious. I didn't care. Didn't matter to me that he didn't like that, but it was a loving, that boundary was not only loving to myself to get the job done, but it was also supporting him in being a more responsible business person. The school of life, our circumstances and relationships provide keys that may open doors to growth and freedom if we are willing to unlock them. Some people go through their entire lives without ever using the opportunities that life brings them for personal growth that would give them a great deal more freedom. The personal growth part isn't fun. I complained about it with Jackie, my inner child coach. This is what she said: "You get to choose either the pain of staying where you are or the pain of growth." And the pain of staying where I was unbearable, and it had no hope. So I chose the pain of growth, even though for a while it also was painful, but it led to the freedom and the much, much greater level of happiness with my life and my relationships than I had in the past. I owe my most profound gratitude to my late husband, Jim. I was so fortunate that eventually he joined me in learning new skills that gave us the just unbelievable freedom of reigniting our love and treating each other with respect 24/7, no exceptions, and helped us to resolve the issue that had been such a difficult issue between the two of us. We had 17 more years together before he passed away, and those years were blissful. I can honestly say that we never even had a harsh word between us because we were so committed to maintaining the boundaries we had placed on ourselves to always treat each other with respect. Now, those years were not problem-free. We had problems, things we had to deal with, but we never took them out on each other again because we were so committed to the inner boundary of treating each other with respect and a great deal of love. And my precious son, my beloved son, Stephen, the Pungent Boundaries book is dedicated to him. And in that dedication, I say, "You taught me more about addiction and codependency than I ever thought I needed to know. But what I learned from life in part, but also from Stephen, is that disconnecting from codependency has made my life so much easier, so much happier, um, so much more free. It's very rare for me to feel resentment about anything for anyone anymore. And I mostly have Stephen to thank for prompting, motivating those lessons for me. So the next steps for you, and in a minute, I'll come back and answer the questions that I see in the chat. But the next steps for you might be investing in these two books, Your Inner Child and Pungent Boundaries. The last year or so, I've been wishing I wrote one book that had both topics in it, because they invariably they go hand in hand. Both books are available in audio versions if you prefer audio. And then here's an opportunity to invest in yourself by saying yes to the coaching package that I'm offering you today. If you're interested in that package, you get $500 off of the package by clicking on the QR code and paying today. When I think about, anytime I think about charging for my services to clients, my perfectionist child gets pretty anxious. So I made a list of all the coaches, therapists, mentors, teachers that have made profound differences in my life, have helped me along on my own journey of personal growth. Most of them I had to pay, and most of the time it was a struggle to pay. I didn't have enough money. Most of the time it was always a stretch to pay for the help that I needed to pull myself out of the pain in which I began my life. I was in a lot of pain, emotional pain as a child and a young adult, and through a great deal of my early adult life. So I'm very bold in suggesting that you're not just increasing my income. This isn't just, to give me the satisfaction of having another client. I want you to see this as an investment you're making in yourself. Today only scratched the surface of how to liberate yourself with inner child work. There's so many other things that would be added and of value as you learn how to work with your own inner child. And if making that investment today, you're uncomfortable with it, or it's out of the question, I certainly understand. You can make an appointment with me that would either be in person or with Zoom by going to Nancy Landrum here at the right-hand bottom of your screen. Go to nancylandrum.com and click on the page that says Work with Nancy. You scroll down just a little bit, and there's a button that if you push that button, it gives you direct access to my calendar. You can book an appointment, complimentary appointment with me. My opinion is that it's not just my opinion. I absolutely know from my personal experience that investing in personal growth is the most rewarding investment you can make for a happier future. I hope you'll choose to do that, or at least if we're not already seeing each other, make an appointment for a complimentary appointment to speak with me. So thank you, Andy DeMarie, for saying no questions, but really great information. And Crystal saying, can you repeat the part about enforcing boundaries? A boundary without a consequence is a lie. That's the statement. If you try to set a boundary, but you haven't also included a consequence and you're prepared to enforce it with the consequence, then the boundary is a lie. Okay. And what is the name of the books? here they are. Your Inner Child, A Path to Healing and Freedom, about inner child work. Pungent Boundaries is the other book about recovery from codependency. And is there anything else? I guess not. If you have any other questions, please put them in the chat box. Otherwise, I just want to thank you for attending today. It's been my pleasure to share this information that has made an enormous difference in the quality of my own life. So those of you who need to leave, please feel free to leave if you feel complete for today. If there's anyone who wants to stay and talk for a few minutes, I'll be here for a few more minutes. So the webinar portion has come to an end. And if you want to stay and talk, I'll be here, but please feel free to leave. And I hope you have a wonderful and safe holiday long weekend. Kimma is saying, thank you so much, Nancy, great material. And I look beautiful. Thank you for that compliment. That's always nice to hear.